Well, welcome everybody. This is Chen Wei. For those that don't know me, this is part two of the Detox series, and it is titled Identifying and Eliminating Common Toxins Found in the Home Environment and Home. So we're going to jump right in. So my first question to start off is, what is your body burden? Okay, so what body burden means is just the sum of all the exposures that you have. Okay, so the sum of all the toxins, the sum of all these different things that your body has to bear. And so the question is, how many chemicals do you come in contact with every day? Now, this word chemical is a kind of a a catch-all phrase for a lot of people. A lot of people use it differently, but in terms of how we're using it, it's basically any man-made substance, okay? Because technically, water's a chemical, right? And technically, these natural compounds are chemicals as well. But the way we're using it is a human-made compound, okay? So to answer that, I decided to do something. I looked at some of the products I use every day and totaled up the total ingredients in there. And most of them are, well, essentially all of them are chemicals, right? And so I looked at my toothpaste, my hair gel, shampoo, and body wash are the things I use pretty much every day. And then I also had shaving cream, aftershave, deodorant, but I don't usually use those on a regular basis. So if I counted it up, and basically I had 79 ingredients. This is just for my personal care products. All right. If I were to use all of those, I would have had 127. Okay. Now, granted, a lot of the ingredients were duplicates. Some of them were water as the first ingredient. Okay, well, that's that's fine. And but then there's also a lot of these ingredients were also natural things like aloe vera or some things like lemon fragrance, or they had other types of herbs, or sorry, other types of natural plant-based ingredients. Okay, so basically, my point in sharing this is that not that all these, 79 chemicals are necessarily harmful, but again, your body has to deal with these things, okay? And this is just for my personal care products, not even counting lotions. So some people will use chapstick. Some women, of course, will use mascara, eyeliner, blush, all these different things. And that can add up to even a few hundred already before they leave the house. Again, do all these chemicals necessarily cause harm? No, but these are things that your body has to handle, right? So this is how I like to think about it. We always have to watch what comes in and then what goes out, right? And if, especially as it pertains to toxins, what are the ways we get it in? Well, we eat it, we drink it, we breathe it, and we touch it. Okay, so a lot of food, which I'll touch on later, maybe even how we prepare our food, and then certain food ingredients. Same with the drinking. Now, breathing, right? We can breathe cigarette smoke, you can breathe smog, you can breathe a lot of these things called VOCs, which I'll talk about. And then touching, right? Again, certain lotions, hair gels, hairspray, anything you come in contact with, that is actually going in our body. I mean, we absorb things, right? Through lotions. There are medications that are absorbed topically. And so we do, all these things are contributing to our total body burden, okay? Now, that's the intake. Then what about elimination? Well, we try to get rid of toxins as well by, we have urination and defecation, which are bowel movements, right? And those two main ways are how we think of detox. But we also breathe out certain things, CO2, of course. And then sweating. A lot of times we forget about that. Sweating can actually eliminate a lot more heavy metals than even urination. And when we sweat, we eliminate things, a lot of toxins. So sweating is another thing. If you're not sweating, you're not exercising, or you just have try to block your sweat pores with aluminum-based antiperspirants, you could be blocking one way of detoxification, right? Or we talked about breathing. You have an asthma or COPD issue that impairs your detoxification. Of course, you have a kidney issue with urination, or you're constipated. That can also impair your detoxification. So we want to think about these things. You are what you intake, and you cannot eliminate. Okay? So the objectives today, these are the main points we're going to talk about. What are some common toxins found around the home? What are common toxins associated with food and as well as food prep? And then what nutrients can help protect us from toxic exposures like food, radiation, these personal care products? And what are some common ways to be tested for toxins or toxicants? For example, pesticides, heavy metals, etc. Right? Okay, so let's just start from the outside of the house. You look at this beautiful lawn, it doesn't just stay like this. If anybody, you guys have a lawn, there's crabgrass, there's weeds, all these different things. So what do? We like to manicure our lawn, and a lot of times we use spray, right? We use um, weed killers. And how many of you guys here have heard of glyphosate? Like, so glyphosate is actually one of the active ingredients in Roundup. Roundup is a very famous weed killer. You guys probably see it all the time in your Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever. And glyphosate has been linked to a number of health issues. It's basically, like I said, it's an herbicide, but it potentially can be carcinogenic, causing cancer. And the studies have shown that sometimes there are correlations with that. And even if by itself it doesn't, if you mix it in with other ingredients, like certain things with certain metals or other chemicals, there are certain correlations in animal studies that show that it is potentially toxic. Okay, we spray it on our crops to as well, and we spray it, but we also spray it on wheat, believe it or not, to actually dry it out because glyphosate is actually a desiccant. It actually dries out the wheat, which helps the wheat kernels to come out a lot easier. So a lot of times farmers spray this beforehand, and unfortunately that can cause certain health issues. Um, some people propose that it's not just the gluten that a lot of people are becoming increasingly sensitive to, it's actually the glyphosate that's being sprayed on the crops. And so that's another thing to consider. So, how much pesticides do we use? Well, 100 million pounds are used by homeowners just in their homes and gardens. So, this is not even counting the crops that we use. Now, CDC found that on their data that over 9,000 people, 100% of people had pesticides. So all of us here have pesticides in our bodies, right? And the average person, they tested 23 pesticides. Average person had over half of those. All right, so we are bearing these loads, pesticide loads in our bodies. Okay, and I'm going to show you a little bit too that not all these pesticides, it's not like we were exposed to it and it's gone. Some of these are what they call persistent organic pollutants. That means they stay in our body for a long, long time. And I'm talking like years and decades. All right, so that's something to definitely be aware of. Now this is DDT. How many of you guys here have heard of DDT? Right? This picture was taken in 1945 in New York, and this is a guy on the beach, and these people are spraying DDT. And notice the sign on the truck. It says DDT, powerful insecticide, harmless to humans. Well, that's what they thought then, but unfortunately later on they found that it was actually kind of neurotoxic. Not kind of, it was neurotoxic. And certainly, again, correlations with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other neurological disorders, and as well, potentially carcinogenic as well, cancer related. All right, so basically, a lot of things that we thought were safe, well, time will tell if they are or not. So that's one classic example of a pesticide that has neurotoxic effects. So this was banned in 1973, but notice this, DDE, which is a metabolite of DDT, and it shows that you've been exposed to DDT in the past, was found in almost 100% of females greater than 12 years old in 2004. Okay, that's 30 years after it was banned. So again, what does that mean? That means it stays around, right? It stays around in the environment, stays around in the soil, and stays around in humans. So again, a lot of these pesticides and other toxins, they're not just here and then gone, right? And a lot of times, if they're persistent, you can think about all these new chemicals that are being introduced year by year, day by day, and humans' toxic burden can be definitely increasing over time. Now, one of the most commonly used group of pesticides is no longer the organochloride, it's organophosphate pesticides. But very similar, they also have neurotoxic effects because they were actually originally developed from what? Nerve gas research, okay? So again, a lot of these can be neurotoxic and possibly cancer producing. All right, so how do we limit this? Well, choose organic, right? So remember last time I said organic means three things. It means non-GMO, no radiation, and three means no synthetic pesticides. So if you try to buy organic, especially the 30 dozen foods that I will give you a list of, that definitely will help minimize your pesticide exposure. Okay, so when it comes to that's fruits and vegetables, right? You wash as best as you can, especially the dirty dozen. And if you have a garden, try not to spray anything because that definitely will contribute to you're basically no longer having organic fruits and vegetables. You're actually spraying chemicals on there. So meat, you want to try to avoid the fat. So why is that? I know everybody loves the fat part of the meat, right? But it's because a lot of these toxins are lipophilic, meaning they like fat. They get stored in the fat, not only in humans, but in animals too. So if you're eating the fat, you're actually eating a lot of these toxins as well. So not only for the fat issue where people are worried about the calories so much, actually, I would think more concerning would actually be consuming a lot of these toxins in the fat. So try to have leaner meats and then try to trim off the fats so that it doesn't it's not on there. And here it says cooking it so it drips away. I'd be careful about that because later on I also mention about something called PAHs and HCAs, which I'll mention a little bit. Okay. But so what do you do with all the weeds? Well, some of you guys here are better gardeners than I am, and so I don't know much about natural alternatives, but from what I saw from doing a little bit of research, that these are some ways that other people use to try to kill the weeds. So you can pour boiling water on them. You can use good old salt, but you got to be careful because that affects the soil. And there's vinegar with a soap solution. I heard that's pretty effective. Of course, you can eat them if you want to have dandelion greens down here. It's a common weed, but what else? They sell those in the store, don't they? So, and then on the right side here, this is chicory. And of course, lastly, you can do some weeding yourself, and it's a good kind of therapeutic thing to interact with the earth. Um, all right, so just don't and forget too that kids a lot of times play out in the lawns and they have exposure to all these different things just from playing on the lawn. So um, just know that kids tend to accumulate toxins a lot more readily than adults. So just same with pets, right? I mean, they like to they'll track in things from the grass and the outdoors too. So just be aware of that, especially if you have carpet. All right, so there was a study a few years ago that checked for C. diff, which is a very nasty bacteria that can cause diarrhea. And there was a study testing 30 different homes, I believe in Texas, and to see where it had the most bacteria in the house, whether it be the shoes, the bathroom, other household items. So it's checked over a number of items, I believe 127 different items. And guess where they found the most bacteria, most C. diff especially? On the bottom of the shoes, right? So that was 39% of shoes had the C. diff, whereas only 33% of bathroom floors had C. diff. So they found that the household object that had the most bacteria was the shoes. So that's one reason to remove the shoes. And so that's only one study, very small study. I found this article on PubMed, which is basically a review of all the studies on, or at least a lot of the studies on shoes. And it says shoe soles as a potential vector for pathogen transmission. Okay, so 13 studies were identified that supported the hypothesis that shoe soles are a vector for infectious pathogens. So these are some nasty bacteria, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, Clostridium C. diff, which I just talked about, and multi-drug resistant gram-negative species. So these were found documented on shoe bottoms in the healthcare setting, community, and among food workers. Okay, so our shoes are dirty, and definitely encourage you guys to remove your shoes if possible when going in the house. Now, for me, it's easy because I grew up doing that. My parents we always did that, but some people are not used to it. So I just definitely encourage that. Again, not only for this health bacterial reason, but also sometimes for allergies and other reasons. If you have asthma, it certainly can decrease the amount of pollens and other allergens that you could be exposed to. Okay, so I showed this slide at the beginning of the slideshow, this picture at the beginning of the slideshow, and it almost seems kind of funny, right? We chuckle at this, seems like overly dramatic, but scarily it might be a little bit hitting closer to home than we realize. So one thing that I just wanted to mention that kind of pervades throughout our whole house is something called VOCs, volatile organic compounds, okay? Now these are found in, I'll show you where they're found. They're in different cleaning products and household products, but basically it's just the smell, the off-gassing of certain chemicals that go into the air. Okay, so you can get this in paints and paint thinners and different things. You smell that kind of chemical smell, either in furniture or these products. Those are usually volatile organic compounds. Okay, and this is directly from the EPA website, the Environmental Protection Agency, from the government website. It says these things may have short and long-term adverse health effects. Concentrations of many VOCs are consistently higher indoors, up to 10 times higher than outdoors. VOCs are emitted by a wide variety of products numbering in the thousands. Wow, so the indoors can actually be more quote unquote polluted than the outdoors, right? And it's saying it's used in these household products. They can release organic compounds when you're using them, or even to some degree when they're stored. Okay? People that are using products containing these chemicals can expose themselves and others to very high pollutant levels, and elevated concentrations can persist in the air long after the activity is completed. Wow, okay. So what are some of the health effects? Well, most commonly, you're going to get some eye, nose, and throat irritation, right? You breathe this in, you're kind of choking a little bit, bothers your eyes. But it can cause headaches, loss of coordination, nausea, damage to liver, kidney, central nervous system, and says some organics can cause cancer in animals. Some are suspected to known to cause cancer in humans. So I didn't come up with this. I didn't find this on a fringe, environmental website. This is directly from the EPA government website that says this. Okay, so it's well verified that they put this on there. So what are some other symptoms you may have? I already mentioned some of them, but you can have skin reactions, shortness of breath, nosebleeds, fatigue, dizziness. So a lot of these other things, okay, that we often don't think about, Fatigue, yeah, everyone's fatigued. Is it your thyroid? Is it your anemia? Is it how you're eating? Is it your sleep? Could it be toxins? You certainly can be. So we got to, start thinking about these things. Okay, so where are they? Well, in the bedroom, do you dry clean your clothes, like your shirts or suits? Well, those will release a lot of those volatile organic compounds. Same with mothballs. I think mothballs are a given, right? You smell the smell, and you can see the naphthalene and some of these other compounds that you can breathe in. But a lot of dry cleaning, they use these harsh chemicals to basically clean the clothes. Bathroom, you spray Lysol, spray these anti odor sprays. They have volatile organic compounds. That's kind of obvious. A lot of cleaning products, right? You see, you're wiping your floor, you can smell the strong ammonia or strong different chemicals. So you're exposed to that. Furniture polish. This is a huge one. If you polish your furniture or you paint your furniture or you're trying to remove your paint, those can all release these VOCs. All right, women too. When you paint your nails, right? It has a strong, strong smell. A lot of these the paint of the nails, you can smell that. And of course, hairsprays, colognes, perfumes. These are volatile organic compounds, and some people like the smell. But there's certainly correlations, again, depending on what the volatile organic compounds are, can cause some of these symptoms that we talked about. Do you ever wonder why some people come in complaining, oh, I'm really sensitive to perfume, right? Their body, their toxic burden is probably very high, and they can't tolerate more compounds. They're already at a high, their allowance is already pretty much past, okay? So that's probably one thing, just to, again, to remember, that if we can minimize these VOCs, it certainly would be good. Okay, let's head to the kitchen now and talk about cooking a little bit. All right, I hope nobody has cookware that looks like this here, like kind of scuffed off Tupperware. Basically, uh, not good. Okay, so these are called PTFEs and PFOAs. You don't really need the long name, but basically, just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So basically, Teflon, or which is the brand name that DuPont made, that DuPont named, it's a non-stick coating, but it's supposed to be safe up to about 500 degrees. Well, what they found was in that after 500 degrees, or even sometimes lower, a lot of people's pet birds actually, if they were closer to the kitchen, a lot of them died. And what they found was it released these harmful compounds, PTFEs and PFOAs. And so young birds, or sorry, small birds were dying. And even with humans, that there are some people when they heat up the Teflon to too high of a temperature, they kind of feel sick, even feel a little feverish, a little chills. They call it Teflon toxicosis, even Teflon flu. So just so you know that these compounds are there, especially if they're scuffed up. If your pans and pots and pans are scuffed up a little bit. I think they're trying to remove these from a lot of compounds. I've seen certain pots and pans at various places, and now it says PFOA free or PTFE free, which is very encouraging. But so that's at least a step in the right direction. So obviously there's alternatives. You can use stainless steel, cast iron, ceramic. Stainless steel, well, the reason people don't use it because it sticks, right? That's why people use the non-stick. But at least it's non-toxic. Cast iron, very durable. People have these for decades, pass it on from generation to generation. Potentially helpful for iron deficiency anemia, and it keeps heat well, right? But they're heavy and you need to take care of them well. And then ceramic is non-toxic, but it's pretty expensive. All right, we're gonna move on to the microwave here. So we already talked about the PTFEs and PFOAs in Teflon, but it's also inside of a popcorn bag. You see that kind of shiny little layer for those of you guys that use popcorn? Well, there's PTFEs, but there's also called phthalates, right? So phthalates are what they call plasticizers for plastics. And you don't ever want to heat up this on the right side. You don't want to heat up plastics generally in the microwave. Even though if it says they're microwave safe, I would just stick with the glass like Pyrex or things like that. So just because it can leach into the food. And like remember, just any little bit amount that certainly increases your toxic burden. Oh, and I hope none of you guys do this, but a lot of these, ready to cook turkeys or chickens, they can be found in plastic and it says it's safe to cook. I would never do that. I mean, they're high in phthalates again, which have health correlations. They can be endocrine disruptors, affect your hormones, and again, potentially carcinogenic, right? Okay, so let me ask a little bit trivia. Which two methods of food prep are best for optimizing nutrient density? So there's no cooking, eat it raw. B is dry heat, no moisture. C is minimal steaming. D is high moist heat. And E is deep frying. So what do you think? All right, yep. So no cooking, eating raw, and minimal steaming. So there's a whole raw food movement that says don't cook food past 118 degrees because a lot of the enzymes denature and everything, and you lose some of the nutrients, right? And so, I mean, they have a point. A lot of foods are nutritious when raw, but on the other hand, a little bit steaming actually can increase the bioavailability of certain nutrients. Like, for example, the classic is lycopene in tomatoes. It actually increases the availability for your body to use it and other things too, like carrots and mushrooms and um, certain other vegetables too. Actually, when you steam it a little bit, it actually increases the nutrient content, and so makes it better for you. So certainly a good way to get better nutrients, and also a lot of these other methods, dry heat and high moist heat. Higher you cook something, the more higher the potential to form toxic compounds, okay, which I'll talk about soon too as well. And of course, everybody knows deep frying is just terrible, not only because of the oil, because you're actually breaking down those fats and it creates a lot of free radicals. You've probably heard that term before, which just wreaks havoc on the body. It's very inflammatory. All right. Oh, sorry, I'm going to pick on barbecuing and grilling, okay? So you see this during the summer months or whatever, but there's a few bad things in this picture, unfortunately. And those two, well, actually three compounds are what they call AGEs, HCAs, and PAHs, okay? So AGEs is what they call advanced glycation end products. And that's just when usually sugar burns and browns. Okay, you look at people love the browning, right, of crust on a pie. Unfortunately, that's the advanced glycation end products. And like the acronym, it actually increases biological aging in terms of DNA damage and things like that. So unfortunately, we don't want things too brown. We don't want to um, brown the chicken too much, and certainly same with the carbs. I know it looks good, I know it tastes good, but definitely try to minimize those. Okay, and then the second two compounds, HCAs and PAHs. So heterocyclic amines are basically when you cook protein with something called creatine and the sugars, they combine and form these nasty compounds, especially when you increase it above 300 degrees. Okay, so that has been classified as a potential carcinogen. And the PAHs is basically from fat. When the fat drips down into the grill, and you hear the tss and all the smoke comes up, those pHs are formed in the smoke, and they, of course, as they rise up onto the meat, they actually deposit on the meat. So not good, right? Definitely not good. And these are toxic compounds. So these are the factors that affect the formation of those two things I just talked about on the right. So what kind of food it is, how much sugar it has, and how much protein, how it's cooked. Again, high heat, low heat, grilling versus microwaving versus steaming, temperature, how long you cook it for. Of course, the longer you cook it, the more potential. Fat content of the food, because like I said, if it drips down and it burns, that fat will form those PAHs. And then the distance from the heat source, right? If your meat is 2 feet up from the grip from where it's dripping, you'll have less of that smoke. Whereas if it's right next to that smoke, all that smoke, all those PAHs are forming in the meat. So, but there's one way to actually minimize these, believe it or not, is actually to add some spices and herbs to that. So if you actually put rosemary on your meat or next to the meat or put it on the grill, they found that it can actually decrease a lot of these heterocyclic amines by up to 90%. Rosemary, garlic, turmeric, you can see how effective those are, and even just other basic herbs like basil, thyme, sage, and oregano. Uh, Virgin olive oil, not sure what percent, but it could be a little bit. And honey, because it's so sugary, and all these other sugary marinades like barbecue sauce, right, actually increases the heterocyclic amines. It's because I told you earlier that those HCAs are actually formed from protein, which is in the meat itself, and then sugar, right? So if you're adding sugar to it, it can form again those AGEs, those um, advanced glycation end products, but also these HCAs. So you're getting a double whammy of not good stuff. What are some other food toxins? I could just list them on and on. I don't really have time to go discuss artificial sweeteners, artificial food colorings, deep fried foods I already mentioned. There's plenty of other kind of additives you see in foods nowadays that are just very unnecessary. So just think about those things again, just adding to your allowance of your total toxic burden. So how do you avoid it? Well, look at the food products, look at the food packaging, and look at the food prep, right? So organically grown, non-GMO, no synthetic dyes, lean meats because of the fat content we talked about, how that holds on to certain toxins, wild caught fish rather than the farm fish, and then good oils, good water, and packaging we talked about no plastics, ideally more from the glass, and you don't want to do aluminum or metal cans because they have BPA. And even though now a lot of them are BPA free, they also have other types of BP, B, I think other related compounds like BPD, I believe, and other bisphenols that are not BPA, but they also have other compounds that they try to replace it with, and most consumers don't know that. And food prep, of course, we talked about slow cooking, no deep frying. You don't want to brown it. Use good cookware, and then choose no high heat. Okay. Um, I just put this in there just for interest. A lot of us think about, especially this was more interest. There was more interest after the whole leakage of radiation or from in Japan. Do you guys remember that power plant that was leaking radiation? But just remember, so radiation, we also get radiation from, just from being out right in the sun, ionizing radiation. those are damaging, right? Those are toxins. By definition, a toxin is something that causes damage. It's harmful. So how does, what foods can prevent or fight this? Well, believe it or not, a lot of berries, raspberries, blueberries, strawberries. Those are probably the best foods to me, from a fruit standpoint at least, because those are also low glycemic, meaning it doesn't raise your blood sugar a lot. So a lot of these berries actually have antioxidants and protect genetic material from ionizing radiation. Okay, which makes sense, right? Because radiation damages DNA, and these are antioxidants that actually protect that. So they fight these free radicals that form. Here's another study talking about radiation. They tested 14 different plant compounds, and many of these protected radiation damage. So things like turmeric, which is fantastic for other things as well, inflammation and brain health. Flaxseed, genistein, which is actually in soybeans and other legumes, ginseng, and then a few others that I don't remember what they are. Okay, so what about water? For if you guys came to the first class, I mentioned this already that a lot of the water we have unfortunately exceeds health guidelines. So I went to that website I showed you guys last time and pulled up some of the local water supply. So I live in Carmichael. So this is the water district, the number of contaminants above the health guidelines and number of other contaminants. So we have 9 contaminants above health guidelines and 12 other contaminants. And then you can look at down here, Sacramento, Laguna, Citrus Heights, Folsom. So actually Folsom seems to do, fairly well, but it's still, they still have a few contaminants above recommended health guidelines. So you can go to this website down here and check out your own water supply if it's not one of these 6 that I chose here. Okay, so moving on to the bathroom. So triclosan, okay, so triclosan is actually kind of an has some antibacterial, antimicrobial activities. But did you guys see about 2 years ago they decided to ban this because they thought it was unnecessary? And actually, a lot of these antibacterial soaps, the triclosan, they found that it might be an endocrine disruptor, again, affecting hormones. So I think it's only Crest maybe still has a little bit of triclosan in there. But yeah, so even something as common as toothpaste, right? The triclosan is still in there. And here was the newspaper article, or sorry, this is one of the articles here on NBC News that said antibacterials had to be removed from consumer soaps because they weren't really any more helpful for removing bacteria, and they probably added unnecessary toxic burden to human beings. And again, not that necessarily someone, felt sick after using soap, but as we've already established, it just adds to the toxic burden that we have in our bodies, total body burden, right? And so they same thing with those hand sanitizers, they had to remove that. And so just as a side note, I remember looking at a study that showed that if you use hand sanitizer before you touch these store receipts, a lot of these store receipts have that filmy stuff on the back. It actually has a lot of BPA. So if you if you just touch it, normally you might get a little bit of the BPA on there, but actually if you hand sanitizer, it increases your absorption by something ridiculous. It really increases your amount of absorption. So don't use hand sanitizer before touching receipts. That's just the lesson there. Okay. And then what about deodorants? Just wanted to mention, aluminum. A lot of times these are just basically antiperspirants. But aluminum, we use aluminum foil and everything, but actually too much aluminum is not very good for you too. And yeah, it's great for using it kind of prevents you from sweating, but as we talked about, sweating is a way of detoxifying, and you're basically blocking up some of your detoxification, one way of detoxifying, right? And then you look down here too, there's also other things that are like, what is all this stuff here, right? And a lot of these parabens have been proposed that there may be correlations with breast cancer as well. And so just just I guess be be wise in your deodorants. I know there's some brands out there, like one's called Native and some other ones that actually have more natural ingredients. So just it's in everything, guys. It's really in all our personal care products and whatnot. So read the labels. Like when I said at the beginning, when I did this experiment, when I just decided to count up all the ingredients, I was surprised as I was reading some of these ingredients. Like, oh wow, I didn't know this was in there. How come everything has fragrance in there? And what is this fragrance? So it was very surprising to me. I mentioned this last time too. There's a database you can check up if there's a skincare product you want to buy. You can look up the environmental working group, what they have on there. They'll give it a rating of why it's good, why it's maybe not the best thing. So you can look into. Okay, so we're going to move on to testing now. So how do you test for some of these toxins? Okay, so let me start with heavy metals. You can test for blood, urine, and hair. The benefit of checking blood is that you can, know what's actively circulating. But downside is it only tells acute exposure. So what you've been exposed to, depending on which heavy metal we're talking about, maybe for the last month. Okay, so let's say you were working with a lot of um, treated wood or something like that with arsenic in there, and that was about 2 months ago. Well, your blood might not be high, but if you did a provoked urine test or a hair test, it potentially would be higher. Hair test is like a good screening tool, not very 100, not very accurate per se, because you could um, be contaminated by other environmental exposures, but it can tell a little bit of exposures. And then the urine's probably is probably the best one of these three. Will tell you. Usually we have to chelate it out, meaning you have to pull it out and check that. So we do that here in the clinic here. And then here you can also test for, so we can test for direct um, levels, or we can check your body's reaction to these chemical things. And so here you look at BPA, you look at some of these parabens, you look at mercury, mixed metals, seeing how your body's actually even reacting to these, okay? So, sorry, this one shouldn't be named direct. It should just be a reaction, basically, to certain chemical sensitivities. But we do have a test by Great Plains that actually checks for pesticide levels in your body. So if those are of interest to you, certainly use those. Up here, a lot of the nuts and seeds are fantastic as well. And then the good oils like avocado oil and olive oil are my favorite, but even some other ones, flaxseed, hemp seed, so on and so on. There's a lot of different ones. Okay. There's also medical products. We have here was one called Ultra Clear Renew by Metagenics that is supposed to help with heavy metal detoxification. Again, just having a lot of the amino acids and the vitamins and the minerals that helps support phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Dim Detox is actually a product from Pure Encapsulations. They actually have things in there called indole 3 methane and um, uh, indole 3 carbinol and diindole methane, which are basically products related or compounds related to the cruciferous vegetables like uh, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. They actually are very important sources of these things. So I guess you could get them from your cruciferous vegetables, but if you need some extra detox support, especially for a lot of women that have excess estrogen, have estrogen imbalances, Dim Detox may help that possibly. And then Met Clear is something from Metagenics as well that has turmeric and some other hops. Doesn't mean you can drink beer, but hops has been shown to also detoxify. And there's other things like citrus citrus flavonoids and other types of compounds and products out there from different companies. So there's a lot of medical products that just basically boost your ability to detox as well. But I would always say food first, and of course you want to just minimize your exposures, right? If you minimize your exposures, you have, I could say, less of a need to detox, right? If your intake is just less of bad things, there's less for elimination, or you just can keep your level of elimination high and you're just going to feel better overall, and in the long run it will be play better for your health. The last two slides are basically just showing, detox is not a new concept. It's been around for, millennia. I mean, this is called panchakarma. It's Ayurvedic medicine. Basically, uses spices and different oils, and some of you guys might have even done this before. This one I think is it's just very interesting. So it's from the Ayurvedic medicine. You guys might have seen this from the Summer Olympics a few years ago from Michael Phelps. He had cupping, which also is, I'm not recommending this. I'm not saying everybody go out and do this. I'm just saying the whole concept of detox, everybody seems to kind of know about this. And so it's not something just just out of the blue recently, but I think probably in light of how many chemicals and how many substances and how many growing different new chemicals we're being exposed to, we definitely need to support our detox by eating well, by taking care of our bodies, by minimizing our exposures. So anyways, that's it. That's the next group appointment will be in 2 weeks. We will be talking about the role of stress, sleep, relationships, exercise, movement, and ways to improve them, and how these things can be some of the biggest toxins that we're exposed to. I mean, stress can be super toxic to our bodies, right? If we have lack of sleep, that's super bad for us. It can raise blood pressure, it can cause blood sugar issues, it can cause just bad things overall. Toxic relationships, oh yeah. I mean, most people know there's these toxic friendships, toxic family members, toxic um, bosses. There's, right? So we can even, in a way, detox from some of these things that we uh, have in our lives that are not chemicals, right? So these are not chemicals, but these are um, things that are just as important for our health. I would say even more so because a lot of times people just overlook these or kind of poo-poo these as, oh yeah, 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 I kind of work on my other things first. Okay, so that's thank you anybody. That concludes our presentation today. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.